Hello and welcome to TMI with Aldous Tyler, special Saturday edition, October 24th, 2020. Now, one of the things that's been in the news a lot lately is that we're concerned, apparently, that if we do get a Democratic president out of this contest, aka in this case Joe Biden, that suddenly the Supreme Court itself might change its very shape, that it might suffer from what's called packing. Now, of course, this is a scary sounding term used on purpose by people who oppose it. But there's a friend of mine here, a friend of the show, in fact, Carl Gibson, who tells me this isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, in a piece that he has at independent.co.uk, he says the most democratic thing Joe Biden could do is pack the courts. Joining us right now, Carl Gibson. Carl, welcome back to TMI.
Thanks for having me back, Aldous. Always good to be on here.
You're very welcome. So, tell me now, court packing. It sounds really scary, man. Well, how is this possibly a good thing?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. First off, I recognize that court packing is that's the right-wing term to describe it. I guess a more appropriate term would be court expansion. But yeah, it is. It's basically the idea of adding more justices, not just to the Supreme Court, but more federal judges to the entire federal judiciary and all the district and appeals courts in all 12 circuits, 13 circuits if you include DC. And I think there's plenty of past precedent for that to show that it's actually not that radical of a thing and can be done with a simple act of Congress. So it's really no different than passing any other kind of bill.
So to be clear, if Joe Biden gets the presidency, it actually wouldn't be him that would be doing the court expansion. It would be Congress, right?
Yeah, exactly. Congress would have to pass a bill. Right now, Democrats control the House. It doesn't look like that will change in November. Currently, Democrats have a 47-seat minority, but if they flip 4 seats, and it looks like they'll flip way more than that, given the polls in several states. But if they win back a Senate majority and elect Joe Biden, then there's really nothing stopping Democrats from passing a bill that would add additional judges to the federal bench and or the Supreme Court. And all Biden would have to do as president is to appoint judges, presumably ones who are qualified enough to be confirmed by the Senate. But this is something that I think the Democrats in Congress who are more institutional will have to accept if they want to pass any sort of legislation that will help people in the next decade or two.
Well, I mean, let's face it, institutional has a number of different connotations, including large size cans that one uses to feed a lot of people. However, in this case, I'm pretty sure what we're looking at are people who basically are so comfortable with the way things have been that they generally don't want to see it change. But this has been a historic move. The Supreme Court wasn't always 9 seats, right?
Yeah, actually, Abraham Lincoln expanded the Supreme Court to 10 justices in 1863, and he did it specifically for partisan political purposes. It was so that the pro-slavery movement wouldn't gain a foothold on the Supreme Court and then overrule anything that would say end slavery, right? It was done multiple times throughout history. Reconstruction era, the number of justices was changed. I think there were as many as 15 and as few as 7, if my numbers are correct. And of course, FDR, the most recent attempt to change the makeup of the Supreme Court was after the Supreme Court in FDR's time had threatened to upend the New Deal. And so FDR had an idea of, well, since a lot of you are older, I'll just add for every Supreme Court justice that's over 70, I think was the number, I'll add another justice to help with your workload. And so that kind of helped rein in the Supreme Court, so to speak. But I want people to not just be limited to expanding the Supreme Court. And I'm afraid that if the Democrats start the negotiations at the Supreme Court line and don't include the federal judiciary, it'll be a lot like the healthcare negotiations of 2009, 2010, where the Democrats didn't start on the single payer line, but on the public option line and had to negotiate back. What I'd love to see is new district and appeals court judges, because the Supreme Court only hears a fraction of the cases that get brought up across the federal judiciary every day. And all of those judges make really big decisions that impact millions of people. And so I really hope that the Democrats will have the courage, and I think they'll need to be pushed from the people, but that they'll have the courage to think about expanding the court at every level of the federal bench.
Well, yeah, and I mean, just recently, I believe it was, we had a federal judge here in Wisconsin decide to uphold the emergency order that Governor Evers had put through. And had he decided not to, again, that would have been pretty disastrous. Now, of course, our Wisconsin State Supreme Court might still get at it. But the point is that it's clearly very important to have judges at every level that are going to give a fair shake under the law and not attempt to just be activist about it. And I believe that's really the thing that's concerning us mostly right now. When we say that the justice system is broken, almost always the complaints are based on people getting treated by a standard that is more biblical than constitutional.
Yeah, and honestly, there's a number of things that people would consider a fundamental part of American democracy or the Constitution that are actually much more malleable than people would think. 'Cause just you're talking about your past example of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. It was a diehard conservative majority until what was it? This past April, you guys got rid of a Republican judge, added a Democratic judge.
Yep.
That majority is still there, but it's a little smaller now. But just think of, and I know Wisconsin is a state, and we're talking about the federal bench, but just imagine all the things that the Wisconsin Supreme Court has overridden or has instituted that are unjust and undemocratic, that just adding a few more justices could change. I mean, there's so much power in the federal judiciary, and people don't really fully understand. I I have to recommend. It's a great book by a guy whose name most people would probably be familiar with, Jeffrey Toobin. He
Uh-huh.
wrote a book. He wrote a book called The Nine. And this is about 20 years ago. This is way before the Zoom incident. Um, but it's The Nine is a book all about how the Supreme Court has the power to override both the executive and the legislative branch, and about just the history of that concentration of power, and adding more justices to this body, this really powerful body, would make our government much more democratic, much more accountable to the people, which I think is what the founders intended. Obviously, they had their own biases at the time, right? But in the spirit of a accountable, transparent government by, of, and for the people, you would ideally want a much larger federal judiciary than you have right now.
Indeed. We're talking to Carl Gibson. He's recently had an article on The Independent, that's independent.co.uk, called The Most Democratic Thing Joe Biden Could Do Is Pack the Courts. And don't worry, the reason he's not appearing on this Zoom call is not because he's pulling a Jeffrey Toobin. As he's assured me, it's simply a lack of shaving. In any case, Carl, what I would like to see then is there any way that we can actually turn this conversation so that people understand that we're not just talking about the Supreme Court, that we're looking for justice for everybody across the board, that we're looking for these courts to be expanded in a way that will allow everyday people in everyday cases to actually have a proper hearing?
Yeah, I think a really great example, given that everyone is talking about voting right now, and I mentioned this in the article, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which encompasses Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, basically the South and the Southeast. They
Those
made a
states.
really, yeah, multiple states. The Fifth Circuit made a really big decision regarding the decision by Texas Governor Greg Abbott, Republican, to limit ballot drop-off boxes to one per county. And I
Yeah.
give the example of in Harris County, Texas. I used to live there. It's really big. It's actually, in terms of square miles, it's 70% larger than the entire state of Rhode Island. Uh, there was a guy who had talked about, he's 82 years old, and he lived in Cypress, Texas. Cypress, Texas is on the fringes of Harris County, and he had to drive all the way into downtown Houston to drop off his ballot. This is an 82-year-old man, and
Wow.
that was a 90-minute round trip for him. So 90 minutes, that's probably from Madison to Stevens Point, right? And so, I mean, think about driving all that way just to vote.
Yeah.
And now think about the counties that are most likely to flip Texas. If Texas does flip, it would be Travis County, which is Austin, which is the liberal mecca of Texas. You
Right.
got Bexar County, which is San Antonio. There's a lot of Hispanics who live in Bexar County. And then there's Harris County, which encompasses Houston, which is the fourth largest city in the country. And so this decision obviously disproportionately impacts Democratic leaning constituencies in densely populated urban areas. Basically, places where people who vote Democratic tend to live, right?
Right. Right.
So anyway, limiting ballot drop-off boxes to one per county was rightfully challenged by civil rights groups, voting rights groups, and the Fifth Circuit issued a ruling staying that decision and saying that, in fact, Governor Abbott was making voting easier by having any ballot drop-off boxes at all. And so it was kind of just a very Orwellian decision. Now, I'll tell you what decided that. What the majority of that decision was brought by two appeals court judges on the Fifth Circuit, both of whom were appointed by Donald Trump in 2017. One of those was vacant in 2012 and had been vacant for 5 years. Even though Obama was president for another full 4 years, Trump got to appoint his replacement because largely Republicans in the Senate obstructed Obama's ability to confirm justices. You had another judge on the Fifth Circuit who was confirmed also in 2017, and his position had been vacant since 2013. So that was a 4-year vacancy. Trump was able to fill these positions, and those two Trump-appointed judges made a ruling that would impact thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of voters detrimentally. Hopefully those voters will still be able to drive downtown and drop off their ballot. Maybe they don't have transportation. Maybe they have to find a way to drop out. They have to make an entire day plan that might involve potentially losing their job. Maybe they can't take off work, right? Or maybe they're caretakers. They have family members who need their help. It makes it unnecessarily difficult to vote. And make no mistake, even though judges are supposed to be nonpartisan, they're not supposed to be politicians, all of the judges that have been appointed by this president have made deeply political decisions in all the circuits. And of course, we can talk about Amy Coney Barrett in the Seventh Circuit. She's been a judge for just around 3 years or so, but there's numerous decisions that she's made that have had huge impacts on voting, on gun rights, you name it. So, I mean, the federal bench really needs to be the number one priority for Democrats if they want to do anything like address climate change or pass universal health care. This is the first obstacle.
All right. So we're talking to Carl Gibson. Again, his article posits that the most democratic thing Joe Biden could do is pack the courts. And as we're actually discussing, it actually wouldn't be Biden. It would be the Democratic House and what appears to be the relatively inevitable Democratic Senate. Cross your fingers. Now, quick question is, would Biden have any role in this whatsoever, except for perhaps a cheerleader?
That's really the power of the bully pulpit, because the president really is someone who signs and vetoes legislation at the end of the day. Obviously, they can appoint new justices when there's a vacancy, but Congress has to create those vacancies. Just like the president can't write bills, the president can't appropriate spending, they can't come up with ways to generate revenue, but the power of the bully pulpit is enormous. Now, to give Biden credit, I don't agree with his position that, okay, you'll know my position on adding new justices after the election. I think that's cowardly. I get why he has to say it, because he's right. The moment he comes out and says, we need new justices on the Supreme Court and the rest of the federal bench, if we want to have any hope of having the things that you people want me to do, yeah, we'll have to have new justices. But he knows the moment he says that, the media will flip the conversation from, oh my God, a 47-year-old right-wing theocrat is getting appointed to the Supreme Court for life in less than 2 weeks, to, oh my God, Vice President Biden is going to pack the courts. How terrible, how awful, how radical. So I think he's right in being cagey about it. But I really hope this is just politics, and that the moment he's in office and the moment he is sworn in, he says, okay, here's my plan. I want Congress to do X, Y, Z. Let's add new justices. Let's get them confirmed, and let's get some stuff done, because this is what has to be done.
Right. So, but to be clear, and I want to make sure that this point is understood. When it comes to creating the seats that he would then fill, does he have any role in the creation of those seats whatsoever, or is that entirely congressional?
Well, yeah, under the Everts Act of 1891, I believe, and I mentioned this in my article, and the Judiciary Act of 1791, there is centuries of precedent that says Congress can have the power to add any new vacancies to any federal district or appeals court as they see fit. The power of the judiciary and creating these vacancies and adding new slots is completely up to Congress. And there are, like I said, there are 2 centuries of precedent that back that up. So if any right wing groups try to sue and say, oh, they can't do this, the law is pretty clear. And any constitutional scholar will tell you that the power to add new vacancies to the court has always been in Congress's hands and will continue to be.
Very good. All right. So, Carl, besides the Independent article that we're talking about here, how else can people find you online? What's the best way?
Sure. I'm most active on Twitter. You can follow me at CRGibs, at CRGIBS. You can also just find me on Facebook. I'm Carl Gibson. I'm not hard to find. And obviously, if people want to, read my writing or get further kind of versed in what I'm following, definitely just keep an eye on the Independent. I'm doing a lot of writing for them. I've also written for CNN, the Houston Chronicle, Barron's, and several other publications. So yeah, just keep an eye on those.
Very, very good. All right. Carl, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time. And just to be really clear, Carl Gibson will pack the courts.
Let's do it.
All right. You're listening to TMI with Aldous Tyler.